As evening settles over the Texas coast, there is a city that rests gently upon the earth, barely rising above the waters that surround it. Houston sits on the Gulf coastal plain, a vast flatland that stretches inland from the sea. And here, in this low country, the city finds its foundation at an average of just 50 feet above sea level. 50 feet, a height so modest that when you stand on a Houston street corner, you are nearly at one with the ocean itself, separated from the Gulf of America by only the gentlest of slopes, the most gradual of descents. This is a place where the land remembers the water, where the boundary between solid ground and liquid has always been a negotiation rather than a certainty. Close your eyes and imagine what this land looked like before the city rose from it. Picture tall grass prairie stretching to the horizon, an ocean of green and gold swaying in the coastal breeze. The grasses grew tall here, waist high and higher, their roots reaching deep into the dark soil, their seeds carried on the wind. Among the prairie, wetlands pooled and spread, marshes and swamps where water gathered in shallow basins, where cypress trees stood knee-deep in slow-moving water, where the air hung heavy with moisture and the songs of frogs. This was the landscape that existed before Houston, before the streets and buildings, before the concrete and steel. The tall grass prairie and wetlands formed an ecosystem perfectly adapted to this low, flat, humid place. A system that knew how to absorb the rain, how to flex and bend with the flooding waters, how to breathe with the rhythms of wet and dry. Urbanization has transformed much of this original landscape, paving over the prairie, channeling the wetlands, but the memory remains in the names of neighborhoods and bayous, in the patches of green that persist, in the very character of the land itself. The climate here shapes everything. Houston exists within the embrace of a humid subtropical climate, and if you've ever visited on a summer afternoon, you know exactly what this means. The summers stretch long and hot, the kind of heat that wraps around you like a warm, damp blanket the moment you step outside. The air itself feels substantial, thick with moisture drawn up from the Gulf, moisture that beads on your skin and makes every breath feel like drinking. Summer in Houston is not a season so much as a state of being, a slow, syrupy time when the sun beats down relentlessly and the heat shimmers up from the pavement in visible waves. But the winters are different. Mild is the word most often used, and it fits. While much of the country hunkers down against snow and ice, Houston winters remain gentle, temperate. There are cool days, certainly, days when you might need a light jacket in the morning, but the cold rarely bites here. The city dozes through winter rather than hibernating, its pace barely slowing, its subtropical plants staying mostly green, its residents venturing out in short sleeves more often than not. This is a climate that allows life to continue year-round, that never quite demands that the city shut down and wait for spring. Yet this position on the Gulf Coast, this low elevation, this proximity to warm waters, these gifts come with a price. Houston is vulnerable. The city lies in the path of hurricanes that form in the warm waters of the Gulf of America, massive spiraling storms that gather strength over the open ocean and then lumber inland, bringing winds that can strip trees bare and rains that fall not in drops but in sheets. The names echo through the city's history: Alicia, Rita, Ike, Harvey, each storm leaving its mark, each one a reminder that Houston exists at the mercy of forces far greater than itself. And beyond the hurricanes, there is the flooding. In a city that sits barely 50 feet above sea level, in a place where the land is so flat that water has nowhere quick to run, flooding is not an occasional inconvenience, but a recurring reality. When the rains come, and they do come sometimes in biblical quantities, the bayous swell and overflow, the streets become rivers, the drainage systems overwhelmed by sheer volume. Houston floods. It has always flooded. The original tall grass prairie and wetlands knew how to handle the water, absorbing it slowly, releasing it gradually. But concrete doesn't absorb, pavement doesn't flex, and so the water pools and rises, seeking its level, reclaiming temporarily the low places it once held permanently. This vulnerability is woven into the fabric of Houston's existence, a reminder that the city is built not against nature, but within it, that the land and water and weather that were here first have not gone away, have merely been temporarily inconvenienced by urbanization. The city learns and adapts, builds drainage channels and retention ponds, updates flood maps and emergency plans, but the fundamental truth remains. Houston sits low and flat beside the Gulf, and the water will always find a way. Consider the scale of this place as you let your breathing slow and deepen. 600 square miles. The city sprawls across an area so vast that driving from one edge to the other can take well over an hour. 600 square miles of neighborhoods and industrial zones, of parks and parking lots, of bayous and boulevards. It is one of the largest cities by land area in the entire United States. A horizontal city that spreads outward rather than building upward, that consumes land the way other cities consume sky. And this is just the city proper. Extend your view outward into the surrounding counties and communities that orbit Houston like planets around a sun. The greater Houston metropolitan area embraces nearly 7.8 million residents, a population larger than many states, larger than many countries. These millions live scattered across the coastal plain, in suburbs that bleed into one another, in towns that have been absorbed into the metropolitan whole, in new developments that push ever outward into what was so recently farmland and forest. Among all these millions, Houston itself stands as the most populous city in Texas, the beating heart of the state, home to roughly 2.3 million people within the city limits. And in the broader American landscape, Houston claims the position of fourth most populous city in the entire United States, trailing only New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Fourth largest. The number itself seems almost abstract until you imagine it. 2,300,000 individual lives, each with their own stories, their own dreams, their own daily routines playing out across these 600 square miles of coastal plain. The city pulses with life, human life certainly, but other forms as well. There are creatures here that remind us of what came before, of the wetlands and bayous that shaped this landscape long before the first building rose. And of all the creatures that call Houston home, there is one that the city has chosen as its own, one that serves as official ambassador for this place where land and water meet and blur: the American alligator. Ancient, powerful, perfectly adapted to the murky bayous and wetlands that wind through and around the city. Imagine these creatures as you drift towards sleep. Alligators, prehistoric survivors, lounging on muddy banks or gliding silently through brown water, their eyes barely breaking the surface. Their presence a reminder that Houston exists within a larger ecosystem that predates human habitation by millions of years. They thrive here in the bayous and wetlands, in the slow-moving waterways that give Houston its character. That the city would choose the alligator as its official animal speaks to an acknowledgement of place, a recognition that Houston belongs to this low, wet, subtropical world where reptiles bask in the sun and water moves slowly towards the sea. As darkness fully embraces the city now, as the last light fades from the western sky and the urban glow takes over, Houston settles into itself. The heat of the day begins to release from the pavement. The bayous flow on in their patient way. Somewhere, an alligator slips silently into dark water. The city sprawls vast and low across the coastal plain, 2 million souls and more going about their evening rituals, eating dinner, watching television, putting children to bed, preparing for tomorrow. This is Houston. Flat and sprawling, hot and humid, vulnerable and resilient, a city built on prairie and wetlands, a city that sits barely above the sea, a city that floods and rebuilds and continues on, home to millions, watched over by ancient reptiles, breathing in rhythm with the gulf that lies just beyond its southern edge. Let the image of this vast, low place lull you deeper into rest, the city spreading out beneath you like a map, like a constellation, like a dream of what human beings can build when they choose to settle in the most unlikely of places, where earth and water meet and blur and become something entirely their own. The story of Houston begins with 2 brothers and a vision, with muddy water and ambitious dreams. It was August 30th, 1936, and the Republic of Texas was newly born, still catching its breath after the struggle for independence. Augustus Allen and John Allen, brothers from New York who had come to Texas seeking fortune, stood beside the slow-moving water. The 20th century arrived in Houston with cautious optimism, with the steady rhythm of commerce and growth that had characterized the city since its founding. But the new century would bring catastrophe and opportunity in equal measure, storms both literal and economic that would reshape not just Houston, but the entire Gulf Coast, transforming a regional trade town into an industrial powerhouse that would eventually rival any city in the nation. September 8, 1900. The date hangs heavy in Gulf Coast memory. On that day, a hurricane of unimaginable fury struck Galveston Island, the prosperous port city that sat exposed on a barrier island in the Gulf of America. The storm surge swept over the island, drowning whole neighborhoods, destroying thousands of buildings, killing somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people in what remains the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. Galveston, which had been Texas's largest and wealthiest city, was devastated in a single night of wind and water. In the aftermath of the Galveston hurricane, as survivors worked to rebuild and bury their dead, investors and shipping companies looked inland, seeking safer harbors, more secure locations for their capital and infrastructure. Houston, 50 miles from the coast, protected by distance from the worst of the Gulf's fury, suddenly appeared far more attractive. Money that might have gone to Galveston flowed instead to Houston. Port development, which had been concentrated on the vulnerable island, shifted to the Bayou City. The tragedy of Galveston became the opportunity of Houston, a cruel calculus but an undeniable reality. The city would honor that opportunity by making itself into what Galveston could no longer safely be: the region's commercial heart, its shipping center, its economic engine. Houston accepted this mantle not with celebration but with determination, understanding that it was building its future on its sister city's misfortune. But fate was not finished with Houston. Just months after the Galveston hurricane, in January of 1901, prospectors struck oil at Spindletop, a salt dome near Beaumont, about 90 miles east of Houston. The gusher that erupted from the earth on January 10th changed everything. Black gold shot 100 feet into the air, more oil than anyone had imagined existed in Texas, more oil than the young petroleum industry knew how to handle. Spindletop announced that Texas sat atop vast underground reservoirs of oil, and the rush was on. Houston, positioned between the oil fields and the Gulf, became the natural center for this new industry. Oil companies established headquarters in the city. Refineries were built along the ship channel. Engineers and roughnecks, investors and speculators all made their way to Houston. The discovery at Spindletop helped transform Houston's economy from one based primarily on cotton and timber trade to one increasingly dominated by petroleum and chemical plants. The city that had been founded as a commercial hub beside a bayou was evolving into an industrial powerhouse, its economy powered by the black crude pumped from beneath the Texas soil. This transformation from trade town to industrial city happened gradually and then all at once, the way such transformations often do. The Houston of 1900, with its merchants and cotton factors, gave way to the Houston of the 1920s and 30s, a city of oil derricks and refineries, of chemical plants and industrial complexes. The air began to smell different, not just of the bayou and the prairie, but of petroleum and industry, of progress and pollution mingled together. The skyline began to change as office buildings rose to house the growing petroleum corporations. The port expanded, its facilities modernized to handle not just traditional cargo, but also the specific needs of the oil industry: tanker berths, pipeline terminals, storage facilities for crude and refined products. The Port of Houston, which the Allen brothers had envisioned but never lived to see fully realized, became one of the busiest ports in the entire United States. Ships from around the world navigated the Houston Ship Channel, a man-made waterway dredged and maintained to allow deep draft vessels to reach the port facilities 50 miles inland from the Gulf. The port handled petroleum products, certainly, but also grain and steel, chemicals and machinery, cotton and timber, every manner of good flowing in and out of the heart of Texas. The port represented Houston's fulfillment of its founding promise, the realization of the vision that water access would make this city matter. As Houston grew outward from its downtown core, a distinctive pattern emerged in its street layout. The city developed a hub-and-spoke design, with major thoroughfares radiating out from the central business district like spokes on a wheel. This pattern was not entirely planned, but evolved organically as the city expanded, following the routes of early roads and rail lines that connected downtown to surrounding settlements and rural areas. Main Street, Westheimer, Richmond, all reaching out from the center, carrying traffic and commerce to the expanding edges of the urban area. This hub-and-spoke layout gave Houston its characteristic form, different from the strict grid patterns of some cities or the irregular organic growth of others. From above, if you could see it mapped out at night, with its rivers of light flowing along the major roads, Houston resembles a star or a wheel, all paths leading to and from the downtown hub. The pattern influenced how the city developed, encouraging growth along the spokes while leaving spaces between them, creating a city that was both connected to its center and sprawling in its reach. The city's flag, adopted decades into Houston's history, reflects these origins as a transportation hub. That flag design acknowledges Houston's early role as a center for rail transportation, those iron rails that supplemented and eventually superseded the bayou as the city's connection to the wider world. Railroads brought cotton from the interior, carried oil to distant markets, linked Houston to other Texas cities and beyond. The city grew up around rail yards and depots, its economy humming to the rhythm of arriving and departing trains. That identity as a crossroads, a place where goods and people converged and departed, became fundamental to how Houston understood itself. Governing this growing, sprawling city required a structure that could make decisions and implement them efficiently. Houston adopted a strong mayor system of city government, a model that concentrates executive power in the office of the mayor rather than dispersing it among council members or commissioners. The strong mayor system meant that Houston's chief executive could act decisively, could push through ambitious infrastructure projects, could shape the city's development through the force of individual leadership. Over the decades, a succession of mayors would use this power to guide Houston's growth, for better and worse, leaving their marks on the city's character and built environment. As the city grew outward from its downtown core and its economy boomed, Houstonians needed a way to understand their changing city, to follow the news of oil strikes and port expansions, political battles, and social changes. The Houston Chronicle, founded in 1901, that same pivotal year as Spindletop, grew alongside the city, covering its triumphs and scandals, its progress and problems. The Chronicle evolved from a small daily newspaper into one of the largest newspapers in the United States, its circulation spreading across the vast metropolitan area.
its influence shaping public opinion and holding power accountable. Picture a Houston resident in the 1920s or 30s, sitting on a front porch in the evening after the heat of the day has begun to fade, reading the Chronicle by the light filtering through the screen door. The paper tells stories of new oil discoveries, reports on the tonnage moving through the port, covers city council debates about street paving or water supplies. The Chronicle becomes the city's record of itself, the daily documentation of Houston's transformation from frontier town to industrial metropolis. As you drift deeper towards sleep, imagine Houston in those pivotal years of the early 20th century, the city recovering from the shock of Galveston's destruction, accepting the mantle of regional leadership that tragedy had thrust upon it. The excitement of Spindletop, the realization that beneath the coastal plain lay unimaginable wealth, the port of Houston bustling with ships from distant waters, streets radiating out from downtown like spokes from a hub, mayors wielding power to shape the city's destiny, the Chronicle's presses running each night, printing the news of a city in constant motion. This was the era when Houston became Houston, when the modest ambitions of the Allen brothers gave way to something far grander, when oil and industry and port traffic combined to create a city of genuine national significance. The bayou still flowed through it all, patient and brown and constant, the same water that had drawn the founders, now serving an industrial metropolis, carrying ships to the Gulf and back, witnessing transformation upon transformation, the only constant in a landscape of perpetual change. Let the rhythm of that growth lull you now, the steady progression from one.
A city lives through its connections, through the ways it moves people and goods from place to place, through the infrastructure that binds neighborhoods together and links the urban core to the wider world. Houston, sprawling across 600 square miles of coastal plain, has always understood this truth. From its founding beside Buffalo Bayou to its modern network of freeways and airports, tunnels and light rail, the city has been defined by how it moves, how it flows, how it connects. High above the city, where commercial aircraft cruise through the thin air at 30,000 feet, Houston announces itself through two major airports that serve as gateways to the world. George Bush Intercontinental Airport, named for the 41st president who made Houston his home, sprawls north of the city, a vast complex of terminals and runways that serves as a major hub for United Airlines. Flights arrive and depart around the clock, connecting Houston to cities across the United States and around the globe, to London and Tokyo, to Mexico City and Sao Paulo, to Frankfurt and Sydney. Intercontinental Airport handles the long-haul international flights, the business travelers heading to oil company meetings overseas, the families embarking on distant vacations, the immigrants arriving to make new lives in this sprawling Texas city. The airport's terminals buzz with the energy of constant motion, announcements echoing in multiple languages, the smell of jet fuel mixing with airport coffee,
the rumble of departing aircraft a constant bass note beneath all other sounds. Closer to downtown, serving a different but equally vital role, sits William P. Hobby Airport, Houston's original commercial airport. Hobby focuses on domestic and regional travel, the shorter flights that connect Houston to other Texas cities, to the American South and Southwest, to the daily business of a city that does commerce across the region. Hobby Airport carries its own history. It was Houston's primary airport before Intercontinental was built, and it retains a certain compact efficiency, a sense of being rooted in the city rather than sprawling beyond it. Between these two airports and throughout the metropolitan area, Houston moves on the ground as well as through the air. Metro, the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County, operates an extensive network of buses and light rail lines that crisscross the city. The buses navigate the sprawling street grid, carrying workers to jobs, students to schools, shoppers to stores, providing mobility for those who don't drive or choose not to, connecting neighborhoods that the city's size might otherwise isolate. The light rail, a more recent addition to Houston's transit infrastructure, glides along dedicated tracks, its electric motors humming quietly as it carries passengers from the suburbs into downtown, from the medical center to the museum district. The rail lines represent Houston's tentative steps toward the kind of mass transit that older, denser cities take for granted, an acknowledgement that even in car-dependent Texas, there are limits to how many vehicles the freeways can hold, how much parking the city can provide. But perhaps Houston's most unusual transportation infrastructure lies not above ground, but below it. The downtown tunnel system, which began in the 1930s, runs beneath the streets of the central business district like a secret city, a climate-controlled network of passages connecting office buildings and hotels, shops and restaurants. Workers descend staircases from street level and enter a fluorescent-lit world of corridors and storefronts, a place where you can walk block after block without ever stepping into the Houston heat or summer thunderstorms. The tunnel system now connects about 95 blocks downtown, making it one of the most extensive underground pedestrian networks in the United States. Imagine it as you drift towards sleep, these passages beneath the city, cool and quiet compared to the streets above, filled during lunch hour with office workers grabbing sandwiches and salads, nearly empty in the early morning and late evening. The tunnels represent a very Houston solution to the challenge of a hostile climate. If the summer heat makes walking unpleasant, build a parallel city underground where the temperature stays comfortable year-round. Above ground, at the heart of downtown, Market Square Park occupies a place of historical significance. The park sits on the site where Houston's original City Hall once stood, where the business of governing the young city was conducted in the 19th century. The building is long gone, replaced by green space and trees, but the location remains important, a reminder that this spot was once the civic center of a much smaller Houston, the place where decisions were made that shaped the city's growth. Market Square Park has been renovated and reimagined over the years, transformed from a forgotten corner of downtown into a gathering place, an urban oasis where office workers eat lunch on benches and food trucks serve tacos and coffee. The park preserves not the buildings of old Houston, but the memory of them, the sense that this place mattered, that history happened here, even if the physical evidence has faded. Houston's aviation history extends beyond its current airports to an earlier era of flight, preserved at the 1940 Air Terminal Museum. This Art Deco building, Houston's original municipal airport terminal, has been restored and turned into a museum that celebrates early commercial aviation. The terminal building itself is a work of art, streamlined and modern for its time, with the clean lines and geometric forms that characterized 1930s design. Inside, exhibits tell the story of aviation's early days, when flying was still an adventure, when airports were small and elegant rather than vast and utilitarian. The 1940 Air Terminal Museum preserves a moment when Houston was already looking skyward, already understanding that the future would be defined by how quickly and easily people could travel. The terminal served the city during the war years and beyond, before being replaced by larger facilities. Now it stands as a monument to an era when everything seemed new and possible, when commercial flight was transforming how Americans understood distance and time. But if Houston moves through the air and beneath the ground, it lives most of its transportation life on the surface, on the vast network of freeways that spiral and intersect across the metropolitan area. Houston's freeway system includes some of the busiest highways in the entire nation, the Katy Freeway, which widens to an almost incomprehensible 26 lanes at its broadest point, the Southwest Freeway, the Gulf Freeway, Loop 610 that encircles the inner city, Beltway 8 that defines a larger orbital ring. These freeways carry hundreds of thousands of vehicles each day, a river of metal and glass flowing in both directions during the long rush hours that stretch morning and evening. Houstonians spend significant portions of their lives on these roads, commuting from distant suburbs to downtown jobs, hauling goods from the port to distribution centers, traveling to visit family and friends scattered across the sprawling metro area. The freeways are where Houston's size becomes most apparent, where the sheer scale of the city reveals itself in the time it takes to cross from one side to the other. Yet beneath all this modern infrastructure, the airports and freeways, the tunnels and light rail, flows the original reason Houston exists at all. Buffalo Bayou, the slow-moving waterway that shaped the city's original settlement, still winds through Houston, still carries water from the western prairies toward the Gulf. The Allen brothers chose this spot beside the bayou because water meant transportation, meant connection to the wider world. Though ships no longer navigate the upper reaches of Buffalo Bayou, though the port has moved downstream to deeper waters, the bayou remains central to Houston's identity. Buffalo Bayou and the other waterways that thread through Houston, White Oak Bayou, Brays Bayou, Sims Bayou, serve vital functions in the modern city that are the arteries of Houston's flood control system, the channels that carry away the torrential rains that fall during thunderstorms and hurricanes. When the bayous overflow, Houston floods, but without the bayous, the flooding would be catastrophic. The bayous absorb and channel the excess water, protecting neighborhoods and infrastructure, serving as the city's first line of defense against the rising water. But the bayous are more than utilitarian drainage channels. In recent decades, Houston has reimagined these waterways as recreational and natural resources, as green corridors that provide habitat for wildlife and respite for humans. The Bayou Greenways system represents an ambitious effort to connect parks and trails citywide.
Houston continues expanding its innovation economy, building on foundations of education and research to create new industries and opportunities. The city that once depended almost entirely on oil and shipping now cultivates biotech startups and software companies, medical device manufacturers, and clean energy ventures. This diversification provides resilience, ensures that Houston's economic future doesn't rest entirely on the volatile energy sector, creates pathways for the graduates pouring out of the region's 100+ colleges and universities. The transition is gradual and ongoing, a slow shift in the city's economic center of gravity. But the direction is clear, toward knowledge-based industries, toward innovation and entrepreneurship, toward an economy that values what minds can create as much as what hands can extract from the earth or manufacture in factories. Houston is becoming, slowly and imperfectly, a city where learning matters as much as doing, where research and education are understood not as luxuries but as necessities, as investments in a future that will require different skills and different knowledge than the past. As night deepens over the medical center, as the universities quiet and the research laboratories dim, as Lone Star College campuses close their doors and Rice's libraries empty of students, Houston's work of healing and learning pauses but never quite stops. Somewhere, a surgeon performs an emergency operation. Somewhere, a graduate student runs one more trial before heading home. Somewhere, a patient sleeps in a hospital bed, trusting that tomorrow will bring answers or at least comfort. This is Houston, too. Not just the dramatic story of space missions and oil booms, but the patient accumulation of knowledge, the daily work of education, the quiet miracles of modern medicine, the hope that understanding can improve lives
and that learning can transform futures. Let this quieter Houston lull you toward rest, the city of laboratories and lecture halls, of hospitals and classrooms, of research that asks questions and teaching that shares answers, of healing that happens one patient at a time, and learning that continues one student at a time, forever. Cities reveal their souls not in statistics or skylines, but in the way people live together, in the languages spoken on street corners, in the art that hangs on gallery walls, in the neighborhoods where communities form and flourish. Houston's soul is remarkably complex, woven from threads that originate in every corner of the world, colored by traditions and histories that have traveled vast distances to meet and mingle on the Texas coastal plain. Houston has one of the most ethnically diverse populations in the entire United States, a distinction that would surprise those who think of Texas only in stereotypes of cowboys and oil barons. The city's diversity is not merely statistical abstraction, but lived reality, visible in the restaurants serving food from every continent, audible in the babble of languages echoing through grocery stores and schoolyards, tangible in the religious buildings, mosques and temples, churches and synagogues that dot the urban landscape. More than 145 languages are spoken in Houston, a number so large it seems almost implausible until you walk through the city's neighborhoods and truly listen. Spanish, certainly, Vietnamese and Chinese, Arabic and Urdu, Tagalog and French, Farsi and Korean, languages from every linguistic family, carried to Houston by immigrants and refugees, by international students and temporary workers, by families seeking better lives or escaping worse ones. These languages don't merely coexist, but interact, creating a multilingual soundscape where you might hear 3 different tongues spoken in the span of a single city block. Zoom out to the county level, and the diversity becomes even more pronounced. Harris County, which contains Houston and its inner suburbs, embraces over 360 distinct ethnic groups, a concentration of global cultures that rivals any place on Earth. 360 ways of being human, 360 traditions and customs, 360 cuisines and musical styles and approaches to family and faith. The number is staggering, almost incomprehensible, but walk through Houston and you encounter this diversity constantly. In the Sikh temple next to the Vietnamese Buddhist pagoda, in an Arabic restaurant sharing a strip mall with a Mexican taqueria, in schools where children whose parents speak different languages play together at recess. This diversity is not always harmonious, not always easy. Different cultures sometimes clash, Misunderstandings arise, prejudices persist, but Houston has largely managed to absorb wave after wave of immigration without the violent conflicts that have marked other cities. There's a practical tolerance here, a recognition that in a city this big and this diverse, you learn to share space or you make yourself miserable. The result is a cosmopolitan culture that feels distinctly Houstonian, unpretentious, pragmatic, focused more on getting along than on celebrating or denying differences. Among Houston's many neighborhoods, each with its own character and history, Montrose stands out as the city's bohemian heart. This inner loop neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets and eclectic mix of architecture, has long been known as a center for arts, nightlife, and LGBTQ+ culture. Montrose is where Houston goes to be different, to experiment, to express identities and aesthetics that might not fit comfortably in the city's more conventional spaces. Walk through Montrose on an evening, and you encounter art galleries in converted bungalows, bars that cater to every conceivable subculture, restaurants serving fusion cuisine that wouldn't make sense anywhere else, vintage clothing stores and tattoo parlors, yoga studios and music venues. The neighborhood has gentrified over the decades, its once affordable rents rising as Houston's wealthy discovered the appeal of walkable streets and cultural amenities. But Montrose retains something of its rebellious spirit, its willingness to color outside the lines. For the LGBTQ+ community, Montrose has served as a haven for generations, a place where difference was not merely tolerated but celebrated, where gay bars and community centers provided space for people to be themselves in a state and region not always welcoming to sexual and gender minorities. The neighborhood's importance to Houston's queer community cannot be overstated. It has been refuge and home, protest ground and celebration space, the place where Houston's LGBTQ+ identity was forged and continues to evolve. In Houston's Third Ward, another form of cultural expression takes shape in a project that blurs the boundaries between art and community development. Project Row Houses began in the 1990s when a group of artists and community activists decided to transform a deteriorating block of shotgun houses, simple single-story structures originally built for working-class African Americans, into an art and cultural center. Rather than tear down these modest buildings, they renovated them, creating gallery spaces and artist residences, community meeting rooms and youth program facilities. Project Row Houses supports African American art and community in ways that go beyond traditional museums or galleries. The shotgun houses themselves become part of the artistic statement, their preservation a recognition of African American architectural and social history. Artists in residence create work that engages with the surrounding neighborhood, with issues of race and class, Gentrification.
A city's character emerges not only in its buildings and institutions, but in how its people gather, what they celebrate, what they eat. Houston reveals itself at the dinner table and the stadium, at festivals and rodeos, in the flavors that define its cuisine and the passions that fill its arenas. This is Houston at leisure and at feast. Houston celebrating itself and the world that has come to call it home. Houston's food scene reflects global influences in ways that would have astonished the city's founders. Walk down any major street, and within a few blocks you might encounter Vietnamese pho restaurants and Nigerian suya spots, Pakistani biryanis and Salvadoran pupuserias, Ethiopian injera and Korean barbecue, dim sum parlors and taco trucks, Lebanese bakeries and Thai curry houses. The city eats the world, quite literally, sustaining restaurants that serve authentic regional cuisines from every continent except Antarctica. This culinary diversity stems directly from Houston's immigrant communities, from people who brought their home flavors to Texas and found enough fellow expatriates to support restaurants serving the foods they missed. The Vietnamese community, one of the largest outside Vietnam, has made Houston a destination for authentic pho and banh mi. The Chinese population supports restaurants specializing in regional cuisines, Sichuan and Cantonese, Hunan and Shanghainese, rather than the homogenized Chinese-American food common elsewhere. Indian and Pakistani restaurants proliferate, serving everything from street food to elaborate wedding banquet dishes. But Houston's food culture isn't only about global cuisine. The city has its own deeply rooted culinary traditions, flavors that emerged from the Texas-Louisiana borderland, from the meeting of Mexican and Southern influences, from the particular demands and possibilities of the Gulf Coast climate and ingredients. Tex-Mex and Creole cuisines strongly shape local flavors, creating a baseline against which all other foods are measured. Tex-Mex in Houston means breakfast tacos stuffed with eggs and chorizo, lunch plates of enchiladas swimming in chili gravy, fajitas sizzling on cast-iron platters, queso fundido bubbling and golden. It means margaritas frozen or on the rocks, tortillas made fresh throughout the day, salsas ranging from mild to punishing. Tex-Mex is comfort food and celebration food, the cuisine of family gatherings and weeknight dinners, so fundamental to Houston eating that it's barely even considered ethnic food. It's just food, the baseline, what you eat when you haven't decided what you want to eat. Creole and Cajun influences seep into Houston from the east, carried by families who migrated from Louisiana, by restaurants that bring Gulf Coast seafood traditions, by the simple proximity to a culture that knows how to coax crawfish and andouille from okra and filet powder. Houston gumbo may not be New Orleans gumbo, but it's real gumbo nonetheless. Dark roux and holy trinity of vegetables, seafood or chicken sausage, served over rice with hot sauce on the side. Po' boys and etouffee, jambalaya and boudin, these Louisiana flavors feel at home in Houston, part of the regional culinary vocabulary.
Perhaps the most telling statistic about Houston's relationship with food is this: Houstonians eat out more frequently than residents of any other major U.S. city. The exact reasons why remain somewhat mysterious. The city's car culture makes restaurant access easy. The diverse population craves tastes of home. The climate makes cooking at home less appealing during summer months. Whatever the explanation, the result is a restaurant scene of remarkable breadth and vitality, where establishments ranging from food trucks to fine dining compete for diners who are willing to explore, to try new cuisines, to support restaurants serving foods they've never encountered before. This enthusiasm for eating out creates a virtuous cycle. Restaurants proliferate because diners support them, and the abundance of restaurants encourages more eating out, and the competition drives quality upward because mediocre food won't survive in such a saturated market. Houston becomes a city of food adventures, where trying a new restaurant is standard weekend entertainment, where conversations revolve around recent discoveries and recommendations, where the question, "What are you in the mood for?" might be answered with any of dozens of cuisines. But Houston doesn't only celebrate food. The city gathers for spectacle and tradition, for events that draw hundreds of thousands and define the annual rhythm of Houston life. The Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo stands as one of the largest events of its kind anywhere in the world, a 3-week celebration that combines traditional rodeo competitions with carnival midway, livestock exhibitions with concerts by major artists, barbecue cook-offs with agricultural education programs. The rodeo takes over NRG Stadium each spring, transforming the massive facility into arena and fairgrounds, drawing more than 2 million visitors over its run. It represents Houston's complicated relationship with its rural roots and urban present, a thoroughly modern city that still honors cowboy culture, that fills an NFL stadium with bucking broncos and barrel racing, that draws crowds wearing both Western boots and designer sneakers. The rodeo is uniquely Houstonian in its scale and ambition, its refusal to choose between tradition and modernity, its insistence that a city of oil companies and medical centers can also be a city that celebrates livestock and horseback riding. Before the rodeo proper begins, Houston hosts the World's Championship Barbecue Contest, a massive competition that draws hundreds of cooking teams to the rodeo grounds. The contest is Texas excess incarnate. Teams construct elaborate temporary structures, some costing tens of thousands of dollars, compete not just in cooking, but in showmanship and hospitality, serve samples to tens of thousands of visitors who wander from booth to booth, tasting brisket and ribs, pulled pork and sausage. The contest represents Houston's relationship with barbecue, that most Texan of cuisines, that slow-cooked meat that requires patience and skill, that serves as social glue and competition alike. For several days each February, the area around NRG Stadium smells of wood smoke and spices, echoes with laughter and country music, becomes a temporary village dedicated entirely to the art and science of cooking meat over fire. The barbecue contest, like the rodeo that precedes it, celebrates Houston's ability to take something traditional and make it massive, to honor heritage while embracing spectacle. Houston's passion for gathering extends beyond food to sports, to the communal experience of watching athletes compete, of tying your identity and emotions to teams representing your city. Houston hosts professional teams in all major sports: the Texans in football, the Rockets in basketball, the Astros in baseball, the Dynamo in soccer, providing year-round opportunities to gather in stadiums and arenas, to cheer and groan, to experience triumph and disappointment as collective emotions rather than individual. These teams provide narrative structure to Houston life, create shared experiences that cut across the city's diversity. When the Astros won the World Series, all of Houston celebrated together, differences temporarily forgotten in shared joy. When the Rockets make playoff runs, the city's attention focuses on basketball. The Texans fill NRG Stadium on fall Sundays, creating a weekly ritual for tens of thousands of fans. Sports fandom serves as accessible culture, as entertainment that requires no specialized knowledge beyond basic rules, as excuse for gathering and celebrating. Beyond spectator sports, Houston hosts events that demand participation rather than observation. The Houston Marathon draws runners from around the world each January, when the weather is cool enough to make running 26 miles through Houston streets merely difficult rather than life-threatening. The marathon course winds through the city, past downtown skyscrapers and through diverse neighborhoods, along tree-lined boulevards and past the medical center, offering runners a tour of Houston at 7 to 10-minute mile pace. The marathon represents Houston's aspirational side, the belief that personal achievement matters, that setting and pursuing goals enriches life. Thousands of runners train for months to complete the full marathon or half marathon, to test themselves against distance and their own limits. Tens of thousands more line the course to cheer, holding signs and offering encouragement to strangers, participating in the collective effort even if they're not running themselves. Throughout the year, Houston hosts dozens of multicultural festivals, celebrations of specific ethnic communities and their traditions. The Greek Festival and the original Texas Renaissance Festival, the Nigerian Festival and the Pakistani Festival, the Caribbean Festival and the India Festival. The list stretches on, each event offering food and music, dance and craft demonstrations, opportunities for communities to share their cultures with the broader city.